All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mic'd in New Haven podcast, episode 118. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that's honestly one of my favorite interviews I think I've ever done. Ashley Banfield, formerly of MSNBC, CNN, HLN, currently on News Nation. You can catch her weeknight program, Banfield, which airs at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. She was on. She was great. I mean, she talked about growing up in Canada. She talked about covering two major summits, nearly getting killed on 9/11, interviewing Yasser Arafat, and of course, what she's doing now on News Nation. So if you haven't watched that, please do so. She was phenomenal. So my next guest, continuing with the news theme, has been reporting on any and all matters in New York City since 2014. She's from my neck of the woods. She's a Connecticut girl. She was born and raised in Weston, and she attended Syracuse University, graduating magna cum laude from the SI Newhouse School of Public Communications. A history maker, she was the first undergraduate student to be accepted to the 2014 Newhouse capstone in Washington, D.C., where she briefly served as a Capitol Hill correspondent. She was formerly on News 12 for a while, covering all matters in the Bronx and Brooklyn, and for the last 5 years has been on CBS New York as a field reporter and anchor, and that is Ali Bauman, who joins me now on the Mike the Medium podcast. Ali, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be talking to you today.
Glad to have you. So, like I said, born in Weston. Take me through growing up, not too far from where I am in New Haven.
Yeah, not too far. Yeah, I was kind of a sheltered kid in the suburbs of Connecticut. And would always dream of living in New York City. So I'm kind of living out my dream right now.
Yeah, Weston's not too far away. I think it's if you get on the train, what's it, like 40 minutes?
Yeah, it's like around an hour or so of a ride start to finish. So like growing up, I'd come to the city all the time on the weekends and stuff and special occasions. So I was somewhat in the realm of knowing the city when I was younger, but obviously not as you do when you move there.
Absolutely. So, when did the interest spark for you to work in media? What prompted that desire to pursue that field?
Well, I mean, I feel like I always grew up in a very news-centric household. My parents have always, the news was always on in my house growing up, so it was always like somewhat literally in the background of family events. So I always had a focus and an interest, I should say, in current events. But it was really like when I was in high school, became very interested in like modern American history and the kind of the 20th century history, and it was kept going, and I loved learning about it and learning about the kind of cultural and current events that were going on of the late 20th century. And it was like that, it ended and it was like, okay, well, now what? I wanted to learn more, and it was like, yeah, well, that's the present now. So it was just kind of a wanting to be that witness to history, and wanting to be on the front lines of these major cultural and social events that I wanted to just engulf. I wanted to just surround myself with.
Were there any specific reporters that you admired growing up?
um I mean, I think Leslie Stahl has always been a hero of mine. I'm now a huge fan of the likes of Anderson Cooper and CBS. I love David Begnaud, Jerika Duncan. Those are big role models of mine. People who are not afraid to just ask the hard questions to people in charge. I just admire that.
And not only that, but go into the eye of the storm too. Sometimes these are
Hmm.
unenviable positions to find yourself in as a reporter, because the climate is hostile, and naturally sometimes the people can be too. But the willingness to go there in the first place, I mean, it's definitely to be admired.
Absolutely, absolutely. That takes a lot of guts.
So going to Syracuse, like I said, you're a Connecticut girl, and is Syracuse that far away? No, but nonetheless, leaving home the first time, and then not just leaving home, but being away from home for an extended period of time, that can be difficult for someone that's 17, 18 years old and relatively only knows one area of
Hmm.
where their life has been spent to that point. So for you, was the adjustment period when you got there as a freshman difficult, or did you just jump right in and you were fine?
Oh yeah, I think it was definitely difficult. I think it's difficult, for any college freshman or any person who's moving out of their hometown or the place that they spent their entire life. It's literally taking you out of your element, and it was it's hard to adjust socially. To I went from surrounding myself with people who I'd known since I was in kindergarten, because everyone knows everyone, to having to literally like meet new people. And it's not like college was the first time I had to meet a new person, but it's the first time you don't have that safety net. And I think I can't imagine anyone would not find that to be, somewhat of an anxiety inducing adjustment.
And given your conversational abilities as a reporter, I guess you found it easy to cultivate those new relationships, I imagine.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think I just really like meeting people and meeting and talking to people, and listening to people. I find that I don't think I'm a particularly good conversationalist at all, but I just am interested in people that are different from me.
So Syracuse's broadcast program, it's produced a myriad of very, very talented individuals who are currently working now. We share a good mutual friend in Jessica Cunnington, who just went over to
Mhm.
NBC4, John Jastrzemski, who used to be on WFAN, who's currently working for Bill Simmons as The Ringer. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention the late Nina Kapoor, who we tragically lost last year and who's very, very missed. And so, being in a program like that, that has produced so many greats and obviously has, I imagine, many, many great instructors, what were some of the most impactful lessons that still stick with you to this day?
Ooh, that's a good question. Some of the most impactful lessons, I think part of reporting, in my opinion, is so much of getting out of your comfort zone and, looking a little silly and dumb sometimes, because the nature of the job is to ask questions. The nature of the job is to not know the answer to things. So you have to be vulnerable. You have to be very vulnerable doing it, because, you can't walk in somewhere and assume you know everything, because then you're not going to find anything out. But sometimes, when you're insecure or intimidated, sometimes it is instinct to act like you know a little bit more, but you have to break that down. And I think that I had really good professors that really just made that point clear, that you have to be vulnerable. You have to allow yourself to look not silly, like you're doing a bad job, but just look like you're in earnest asking a question because you don't know the answer to it, and that is hard to do sometimes. And I think that they just really stripped away not that it just stripped away the ego in any sense, to be like, you have to just put yourself out there. And I think that that was one of the things that really stuck with me.
I am Mike Colón. This is the Mike the New Haven podcast. Ali Bauman of CBS New York is our guest for episode 118. So I think what's unique about Syracuse too is that, normally in most communication classes at a given school, you're not doing it in the field right away. But Syracuse has their own television station, Citrus TV.
Mm-hmm.
So being a reporter there, and I remember you mentioned on another podcast that you had your own show even for a little bit of time. Do you think that gave you a leg up as opposed to other kids coming out of other schools?
Absolutely, 100%. When I was like starting to look for jobs out of school, I felt like I had such a great advantage because I had already had this experience. And I mean, I had experience at actual TV stations when I was in college, because I had an internship program with the local news station there as well, and two internships actually with two different local news stations in upstate New York. So I had that actual experience, but the Citrus experience, the local news station in Syracuse, like gave me that early experience, like so early on. Like I was, 19 years old and learning how to actually go out and shoot real packages in the local Syracuse area for the station, and learning how an actual newscast has to run. And the great thing about that program is that there really isn't like adults at the local news station. Like it really is run by the students top to bottom. Like I don't think I ever really had to deal with an adult, but like it wasn't like there was a chaperone watching and telling, oh, this is not good, or making the decisions or telling us anything. It was your bosses were the juniors and seniors in college, and they were the ones running things. And it gave you that independence. They gave the students that independence to make their own mistakes and to learn from them.
I think sometimes that's the best experience. I mean,
Yes.
I've been at this now. We're not too far apart in age. I won't say a woman's age. That's the cardinal sin. So I won't commit it. But as my listeners know, I'm 21 and I'm a few months shy of 22. And that's really as doing writing and of course, doing this show 117 episodes in. I was joking around about this with one of my previous guests. I will listen to some of the earliest episodes just to learn. And I'll go, like that was terrible. But the point is you have it under your belt so that it serves as a basis to where you can say to yourself, okay, I don't want to do this. I don't want to frame questions this way. But by the same token, I did this well. Let me expand on this, which I imagine, you did obviously, and you're still doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key is just to always keep growing, because I'll look at stories that I did from a year ago at this point, and I'll still be like, oh, that's so cringy. I don't even want to watch that back. But that's a marker of how much you've improved in that time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great barometer. So this is an interesting time frame in your life. Well, granted, you've had an interesting life to this point, which we'll dive deeper into as we go. But 2013-14, so you spent a semester abroad in Spain, I believe. And,
Yeah.
spending a semester abroad and studying in a land like that with such a rich cultural history, and obviously it's a different language, you're not Hispanic, so obviously it's a little bit of a disadvantage at that point. But nonetheless, being there and learning what you learned in that time frame, take me through what that experience was like.
Oh, I loved it. That was one of the best time periods of my life, because I had the honor of living with, a family that was just a normal Madrid family. And they lived in an apartment. They had two kids. The dad was a college professor, not at the college I was studying at, just a different college professor. And the mom was a hat designer, and they were just the kindest people, you could ever want to live with, and help, take us around and stuff. And I loved having that. It wasn't just like I was out on my own exploring in a city that was foreign, which I was doing a lot of the time, but I had that, these amazing tour guides who also were amazing cooks. So then they cooked dinner and stuff. So it was great. It was a win-win. And we would have to watch the kids sometimes, because they were, younger kids, and they were big soccer, football,
Yep.
fans. And so I got to, like, it wasn't just like I was meeting strangers at a bar or something and learning about, who were fans of the teams. I was like in the household when they were actually, rooting for these teams to play. It was just, that was like the best part of that whole experience, was this family that I was able to live with. And then what was the rest of the question? I got on a tangent about them and I forgot.
That's fine. That's fine. The more the guest talks, the better it is. I guess, what it taught you, I guess, in terms of, well, you kind of covered it, but what I could, you wanted to add something, my bad.
Yeah, no, it's just being on your own even more, and being, I am conversational in Spanish, but I'm definitely not like perfectly fluent. So it was just, you're always having to use your skills in one way or another. You can't like float through. You have to either be using your navigating skills, your language skills, or just you're hyper aware of what's going on, because it is literally a foreign place. So it was just, you're very in it, which is great, which is beautiful.
Well, that actually covered what I was going to ask next, because I was going to say, New York City has such a large Hispanic community, and I believe half of my family from the Dominican Republic is in New York City. So, if you have a bunch of crazy Dominicans wilding out, and Puerto Ricans too, because I'm half Puerto Rican in the Bronx and Brooklyn, they're probably related to me. So I was going to say that, but you covered it well, because having to know at least a few different languages, because there's so many different communities, Italian, French, you name it. I guess it helps to at least be conversational, to where if you have a guest in Spanish, you kind of know what they're saying, I imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure like Spain Spanish is very different than Puerto Rican and Dominican Spanish. So a lot of times I'm out of my element, because I'm like, I have like like Spaniards speak much slower than I think
and more proper,
like a lot of Latin Americans do. Yeah. Well, just like it's slower. Yeah, it's more like the traditional, I guess, grammar. So it's like a little bit more textbook for someone who's not fluent. It's a little bit like, oh yeah, I remember that conjugation. But yeah, so it's definitely different in that sense. But it's any kind of new cultural experience, I think, is beneficial for everyone, no matter what job they do, because it's just learning about, and experiencing someone different than you. And I would never be able to know every single language that is spoken in New York City, because there's just, I think, more languages spoken in the city than you can count. But and I love going into different neighborhoods and learning about different cultures and stuff. And it's it was one taste of one that I knew a little bit, or I got to experience a little bit more than I would have. But that is just a drop in the bucket of what New York City offers.
No, and it's, like I said, in a city of 8 million people, I don't think, I just think even in your job, where you see so much on a day in and day out basis, you're only scratching the surface. And so before we dive back into your time in New York City, like I mentioned when I was introducing you, you were Capitol Hill correspondent for a while. And here you are, again, that's the other leg of the question, and what it was definitely a notable time period in your life. to where here's Capitol Hill, which has been in the news recently for reasons very well known. And a lot of the decisions that take place day in and day out that affect not just the country, but affect the rest of the world are taking place there. So for you to be a rookie at the time in the eye of the storm, take me through first how that opportunity arose for you. And once you got the opportunity, how you wanted to go about covering Capitol Hill.
Yeah, that was also, I was so honored to be a part of that Syracuse and Newhouse has this incredible program for their graduate students, which is for the summer, they match all that, and they have a small graduate program for broadcast journalism, but they match all the students with a different local news market around the country, a small local news market around the country, like what would probably be a starter market for a lot of reporters. So they match you with it, and then everyone goes to Washington, D.C. for the summer, and your job is to be reporting in Washington, D.C. for that local news station. So for instance, I was matched with a local news station in Elmira, New York, a small market, a small area. They would never normally have a Capitol Hill correspondent for Elmira, New York. That's not something that would be in their budget or anything, but so it was a win-win for them because they got extra content that they wouldn't normally be getting, and we got extra exposure and extra opportunities that we normally wouldn't be getting. So the job was not necessarily to cover like national stories covering the president. It wasn't necessarily that. It was more of like finding the like local hook for that market in Washington, D.C. So it was a lot of like, I interviewed, some of the congressmen that represented that area and talking about that, or finding different bills that were being talked about in the Senate, or different, whatever things that were going on in DC, finding how that affects the people in your market and localizing it in that way from DC, which is invaluable experience, because I think that's what every local news reporter does all the time. That's what local news is. A lot of times it's finding it can be a national story, but finding finding out how that affects the people that are your viewers. And so that was, definitely challenging, because you're kind of on your own. Like, it's not like they were telling me what stories to be doing. I had to be telling them, the story that I was working on from that area and pitching it to them in that sense. And I didn't have a car, so I'm just carrying camera gear all around the subway system. I forgot what they call the subway system in DC, but like carrying a tripod around the city, like having to hail taxis. I think this was even before like Uber was super popular at that point. And so it was a lot of hard work. And like on Capitol Hill, you have the top of news stations and news crews there, and there's like little me trying to set up my tripod and like hook up to the malt box. So it's intimidating, but there's that humility lesson that has to come in of like, yeah, it's a little like, I'm totally out of my element here, but you just kind of have to power through it and get it done.
And I imagine that this served as a good experience, because this is one thing I'm still trying to do. And I wouldn't call myself a journalist. Somebody called me that recently, trying to be nice. And I said, either one of two things is at work here.
You definitely are.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Chronicler, maybe, but journalist, I wouldn't go that far quite yet. If somebody's saying that about me, I'm paying them. When I'm not paying them much, but I'm paying them. But I haven't paid Ali yet. I'll have to Venmo her after the podcast. But that being said, I'm trying to get better at, getting sources. Like, the bulk of this show is a lot of NYPD, FDNY interviews, and they're retirees, so they can speak a little bit more freely, but they still have their links into their respective departments. Something like that, you'd like to get a little bit more insight into and peel back the curtain. So for you, obviously in that situation on Capitol Hill, and as we'll dive deeper into momentarily, your time in New York with what you've covered, how did that experience help you cultivate those sources to where if there's breaking news going on and you want to know exactly what's going down, you can call that person, you can text that person, and they'll fill you in.
In DC, I mean, like, honestly,
DC, and then
not a lot of sources.
Okay.
It wasn't a lot of sources that I had cultivated from that time. It was because that was a lot of, people that were transient. It wasn't like I was connecting with the local congressman in that sense where I could text them with what was going on. It was a lot of like, aides and staffers and stuff that were helpful, but transient. It was people moving in different positions.
At least I asked. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I figured it was worth asking. So that brings us to your time in News 12. I mean, you got to News 12 in 2014. The thing that I like about News 12 is that, not that I'm knocking any of the big stations like NBC, CBS, or ABC, they do a great job too, but News 12 is very, very, and I was having this conversation with Cunnington a while ago, very gritty. You know, they get the job done. There's a lot of one-man band reporters out there, and they will find the most local of stories, which I love because it's a special kind of reporting. It's almost a lost art. So here you are in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, covering very notable stories, sometimes stories that made national news. Like, for example, SummerSlam. I used to be a big wrestling fan. SummerSlam was at Barclays in 2015. You were there covering that. But there's also the other stories, like the market on the corner here, the crime story there. Being there and now living in New York City, what amazed you most about the Bronx and Brooklyn? Who were the colleagues at News 12 that most made you feel welcome?
Oh, I mean, Jess Cunnington definitely made me feel very welcome. Was a great mentor to me and is still a great mentor and role model, and I admire her very much. She's, one of the friendliest and nicest people you could ever meet. So it's you can't say a bad word about her. And what surprised, so you were asking like what I found in the Bronx, like what struck me
amazed you most,
and those there amazed me most, honestly. And I stand by that the Bronx is my favorite borough, because I think the people are the friendliest in the Bronx. I think that it just has the most neighborhood feel of any borough, and has, people are just more than any other area I've found, are willing to, if you need help, to help you out. And I love that. I feel like people are very welcoming. And that feeling I stand by, and that was one of the things that definitely struck me when I first started working there, because I wasn't super familiar with the Bronx. I was learning on the job and learning as I went, and it was something that I just absolutely fell in love with. And still, if I am sent to the Bronx for a story, I'm always happy because I always love the Bronx.
My family's
and not to say the other boroughs are not friendly, but it's particularly friendly.
Yeah, there you go. Ali Bauman's our guest here in the Mike New podcast. Certainly happy to have her. Been working on this for a little bit. So, again, being down there in that particular borough, really any borough, I mentioned News 12's operations. Oftentimes you're pitching your own stories, especially if you're a one-man band reporter. So it's one thing to say, okay, this is happening. Go out and cover it and figure out what's going on and get back to us and we'll air it at 5:00. And I'm sure there was some of that in News 12 too, but in the instances where you would have to go out there and find something, what exactly would you look for and how would you find it?
I mean, I still at CBS have to pitch stories every day. So that is definitely something I'm still doing, is trying to find stories. It wasn't so much an instance of like you walk in for the day and they say, okay, we don't have an assignment of you, so go out and find what's going on. It was less about that. It was more about like, you wanted to come in with story ideas that you could start working on for that day, whether maybe it wasn't turnable for that night. And this is still the case. This applies to both jobs. Maybe it's not turnable for that night, but you can start making calls and start, knocking on doors and finding out things that are going on to maybe finish it up another day or finish working another day. But yeah, for both these jobs, it's a lot of like trying to see what people in that area, whether it's the Bronx you're covering or whether it's all of New York City, what people are concerned about, what people are talking about, and what people want to bring attention to. And it's fine. It's talking to people that you met the day before and while you're interviewing them about topic A, getting in a conversation about them. And a lot of times they want to share what other thing is going on. Like, I mean, a lot of times you go out and you start on a story and people say, you really should be reporting on is XYZ. And maybe you don't do it that day, but you can look into it for another day. Or it's looking at things that are in the papers and things that are in the newspapers and trying to figure out how you can make it work for TV, or who can do interviews, or who you can find who can do interviews and make it a story localized for your market.
You got to CBS in 2016. And going there, and you were also with another News 12 alum, Maggie Kent, who's now down in Philadelphia, who's about to have her first kid. So congratulations to Maggie, another friend of ours, who's, again, a very sweet person. Even though she's...
And I want to say, she's also one of the people that made me feel super, super welcome at News 12. At News 12. So she's a gem.
Even though she's a Philadelphia sports fan, we'll forgive her for that.
We'll
let that slide. Everything else about her is good. Shout out to Maggie. She was also featured in the column I wrote, which I'll reference a little bit later on, involving Ali Bauman, who I'm talking to today. So 2016 getting there. I mean, you mentioned, of course, when you were on Capitol Hill, it was a little bit intimidating given all the major networks you would see. And you're walking into a newsroom in 16, Lou Young's still there. It's shortly before he retired. Alice Gaynor, Dick Brennan, Andrea Grimes, Marsha Kramer, Dana Tyler, Christine Johnson, and Maurice Dubois. Those are just some of the names that are there. So walking in that first day, was it like as soon as you walked into the newsroom, whoa, I'm really in the big time now? That's not a shot at News 12 in any way, but obviously CBS, with the nucleus they have, it had to be just as intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt so out of my element. I'm still intimidated by it. So many of the great names you just mentioned are my colleagues, and I have so much to learn for them. And I came in feeling like, how am I even going to begin, doing stories on a level of these people who have such incredible, resumes under their belt and stories under their belt. It was incredibly intimidating, but what was I going to do? Not take the opportunity because I was intimidated by it? Of course not. Like, you have to just try your best, and that's what I did. And it was like, I knew going into it that I was very young for the job, and I was, inexperienced for the job. But it was like, I just got to try my best, and if it doesn't work out, then at least I tried, and thankfully it has worked out so far.
And you picked a heck of a year to go there, because that same year was the election, which had a lot of New York ties. Yes. Obviously, Trump being a New York guy, and then Clinton being a former New York State senator. So covering that, where it was obviously such an intense environment, take me through some of the more notable experiences that you had while covering that, from when it started, obviously, right up until in November of 2016.
Yeah, and a lot of the more seasoned reporters took more the serious political stories in that sense. But you're still in it, you're still covering all of it, and I think that, like, the biggest thing that I'd seen during working from before the election to now, obviously long after the election, is like the change in people that you interact with, of like the fake news stuff like that, because that really became popular like while I was reporting in the city. So it was like seeing that, even though New York is a very liberal city, it's not all liberal, and you still see a lot of, it was just like the amount of times you would hear like the anti-media sentiment all the time reporting, like that grew, I feel like, a lot in my time working here.
I want to dive deep into that in a moment, because you're very active on social media and you've used it as a tool to get your stories out there, which has led to some interesting moments for you. But one thing that I do want to ask you about is that terrorist attack in Lower Manhattan in 2017. And for people that may not be familiar with what I'm talking about, in October of 17, a individual who I believe was linked to, I don't know if he was linked to ISIS, I can't remember, but it's not important. He's evil, so I'm not going to mention his name. He got in a truck, and he, on the West Side Highway, not too far from the World Trade Center, ironically, ran down a bunch of people and killed 8 of them. This was obviously a very shocking story. It's a very tragic story. And CBS had a big hand in covering that. That day, when you found out what was going on, to having to get on the air and tell what you could of what you knew, take me through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think with like any instances of big breaking news, like when it first happens, you're processing like, okay, is this really happening? Like, is this one of those false alarm type things, or is this like a real actual major event? And it quickly became, obvious that it was a real major event. It's surreal, and you're trying to say what you know, but in those early moments of breaking news, a lot of times you don't know a lot. You're just trying to talk about what is going on around you, and processing it yourself as you're processing it on TV. And that's, a difficult thing to do. But it's when, in any of those breaking news moments, is when you kind of go into like, the, I don't want to say survival mode. I don't think that's a good word to use, but you know what I mean? Like, we're like, all right, all of your synapses are firing. Like, everything is, you're focused. It's like, it's time to get the job done, and you kind of go into that mode of like just focusing on what's immediately ahead of you, and not thinking about everything else that may be causing you anxiety or causing you like concern, because that's for later when you're done with the shift. right now it's just doing what what you have to get done.
Ali Bauman's our guest here on the Mike New Haven podcast. It's been an interesting conversation so far. So expanding on it even further, talking about your use of social media, you pride yourself on being a millennial in that sense, and really using Twitter and using Instagram, where I follow you on, and you can follow her. I'll link it in the description of this podcast. Ali Bauman TV on, I'm having a brain fart, Twitter, and then Instagram, of course. Ali Bauman on Instagram.
That little thing, Twitter.
Yeah, that little thing. So you had two notable experiences in particular. I mean, last year, you had people coming at you from one side for your coverage of what was going on with the protest in Manhattan. And then you recently did a story on the NYPD gang unit, which got you some flack from the other side. So obviously there's a significant benefit to using social media. It's a valuable tool to get these really cool stories and really gritty stories out there. But then there's that downside too. So what has using tools like Twitter, tools like Instagram taught you about the do's and don'ts? And when you do catch that flack, how does one in that situation, because we're all human, nobody likes to be criticized, nobody likes to be insulted, obviously. How do you go about putting up that barrier and creating that thick skin to not let it get to you and keep doing your job?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's hard, and yeah, no one wants to be bullied in a sense. But it has taught me even more so than what I already was doing, to think very carefully about what I say and how I say it. And not to say that I've said anything bad that got me, in trouble, but it's just like you want your message to be as clear and to the point of what you're saying, true to what you're saying as possible, so that it can't be misconstrued or so that it can't be interpreted in any other way. Because if it can be interpreted in a different way, Twitter will find a way to interpret it that way. So, and it's hard to then explain oh no, that's not what that means. This is referring to something else. Once people interpret it one way, that's how they interpret it. So it's trying to get your message as succinct and clear as possible. So it definitely has helped improved my skills in that sense. Because yeah, like what you're saying, it's was a lot of before last year, I would have tweets that would, maybe get picked up and get more attention than others. But it was really last year when I was covering the protests, where literally just videos of showing the protests and showing and saying where I was it could get picked up by one side or the other in a way, and whatever the commentary of the person who was retweeting it would be the commentary for the tweet. It's that was never said in my thing. I never said that, but that becomes the commentary, and then you get then it just snowballs for the next 24 36 hours, and it's just all right, you can't really open Twitter for those 36 hours because it's pointless. And yeah.
I remember commenting on the gang unit story, which was a great story. And I went to sleep. Thank you. You're welcome. And I went to sleep that night, and I woke up in the morning. I was like, dang, they're ratioing my girl Ali. We call it my generation. We call it putting somebody in a pack. They're putting her in a pack. And I'm like, for what? Because I'm like, it's one thing, like you said, if you said something inflammatory and derisive of it, then obviously that's going to elicit a reaction from somebody. But it was literally just, here's the story. And I got people saying, she's a stenographer for the NYPD. I'm like, did you watch the story? And usually the answer is no. It's just, but that's a product of living in a very reactionary society in general, even without Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of criticism. It's not to say if there's criticism, I ignore it. There's criticism where I take it to heart and I listen to it, and if it's thoughtful as a genuine response to what I'm reporting, then I take it and I try to use it to improve myself for the next time I do a story. But yeah, like you're saying, a lot of times it is people that aren't watching. For instance, there was I don't know how long ago it was. I think it was sometime in this past summer. There was a blackout, there was a heat wave, and there was a lot of blackouts or something. And the city was saying, we want people to avoid blackouts. We want people to try to conserve energy as much as they can in the city. That's what the mayor and city hall was saying, conserve energy. To front the story, and what I say in the story, I did it from Times Square, because Times Square is the least, energy conserving place in the planet, and it was fully lit up. And so I do the story from Times Square, because I'm saying in the story, people have been asking about lowering Times Square, turning off some of the lights in Times Square, but people took that headline and the video, even though the video was was in the tweet, and just started ripping me apart for like, oh, so unaware that she's reporting from Times Square. And it's like,
Remember that.
all right, these are the people you can't reason with. Because yes, I said that. Like, yes, if you paid attention for 2 seconds in the video, you would see that I'm talking about that. But it's people that just see a picture with no sound and a headline and react to that. And that's just kind of like, all right, well,
I had that
it's not
experience.
constructive.
Not on a large level, but even on a small level, it's annoying. I remember I used to write for this blog named Gotham Sports Network when I was starting out. I was like 17, and they covered sports, and I was writing about the Yankees because there was at one point, this is, the year that they made it to Game 7 and they lost to Houston, bunch of cheaters, who I will not be rooting for in this World Series, by the way. Let's go Braves. And I said, I think they should keep Joe Girardi. It was a column on that. And I had a tweet like a few weeks prior when they had blown a playoff game and he had made a boneheaded decision in the game. It was a reactionary tweet. And I made a reference. I said, I know in the column, I know I said this a few weeks ago, but, and the first comment I get is, remember when you said he should be fired? I'm like, did you click the link? It's in the first sentence of the column, but that's how just people are in general. So I speaking of columns, I wrote one, not to sound like a shameless self-promoter, but for my listeners, you may not remember this. I wrote a column last year because in addition to this podcast, occasionally I'll write, not for an outlet, but just for myself, because I like to. And it was a column on being a reporter during COVID. Bill Ritter of WABC was in it. Our friends, Jessica Cunnington and Maggie Kent were too, and you were as well. And you talked about what the last year has been like. And so just to condense what you told me in the column, as far as the emotional toll of what COVID has done and what the protests were and everything else, how do you go away a lot at these beautiful trips. I imagine that's an avenue, but nonetheless, besides that, how do you decompress and not let it get to you up here?
Yeah, it's hard because the job is heavy all the time, but definitely, in the past year and a half, it's been particularly heavy. So it weighs on you, and you're talking to people on or about the worst day of their lives a lot of times, and that's a hard thing to do. And I try in the stories that I'm reporting, I try to be the vessel of the message and emotion that the person is saying in a lot of times, and just help them get their message across in that sense and what they're feeling. So by just a side effect of that is like you secondhand feel a lot of the emotion and then have a lot of that like heaviness. And it's hard to decompress. And I try to do it, go on vacations, and I like to travel. So that definitely helps. But I think it's kind of just I try as best as I can, and I'm not perfect at it, but just compartmentalizing as best as I can into when I'm not working, to just try to, enjoy and enjoy my life and enjoy the things I like to do, and the city and my, friends and family, and not as much, turn off the news sometimes when I'm not working. And that's very hard to do, but to just, focus on what is actually happening around me and compartmentalize in that way. But it's hard. It's it does take a toll on you.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that I've learned to do, because and it's amazing. Something that used to be a big part of your life after a while doesn't. And it's not that I'm bashing anybody, but I used to watch the news, not cable news, but just like network news. My mom has a joke with me all the time, because even though I'm in New Haven, I do watch my news. I watch a lot of the New York news because I love the city. It's my favorite place to visit. And she'll say, you know more about what's going on in the Bronx than you do about what's going on around the corner. And that's just because I like to keep up. But even then, when COVID started, I had to shut it off, because every day, not that they meant to be bleak, they were just covering the situation. It would be Christine Johnson reading, now we have these amount of deaths, now we have these amount of hospitalizations. And I'm just like, I can't do this, because it's going to get to me. And I imagine, and it's just me on a small scale, so I can only imagine how it could affect somebody working in that environment. But from the looks of it, you've handled it well.
Thank you. Yeah, I obviously have to be paying attention to the news in a sense, but, or, I have to be paying attention to the news very much, and I do, but sometimes during the past year, I kind of had to scale back a little bit of like, okay, it's impossible to keep up with everything. You can't know everything about everything that's going on. And I was maybe early in the pandemic, because I was using work to escape just my own, fears of anxiety as to what was going on in the reality. I was, even though the news is reality, I was kind of just like diving into work and keeping myself busy in that sense. I kind of had to just scale back and be like, all right, I can focus on the stories and the beats that I have, but if it's not something I've been covering and I don't need to know it, maybe I don't dive into it maybe as much as I would have, just because I don't have the mental space sometimes.
Right. So this has been fun. I promise to keep it brief. Allie's a busy woman. She's on the run, so I don't want to keep her too long. So now we will get to the concluding segment of this podcast called Rapid Fire. 5 hit run questions from me, 5 answers from you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. First, funniest story you ever covered.
Funniest story I ever covered was a silly story that I had to cover a couple years ago of someone had taken video of this guy dressed as Santa Claus that was like surfing on the Hudson River, or like whatever, some kind of like surfboard type thing on the Hudson River. It was like silly. So I had to cover it. I tried to do it in the most humorous way I could, of making it seem like a film noir mystery of who this guy was. And it was fun to play around with something as, silly as a surfing Santa.
I mean, you need that in a city where you said the job can be heavy sometimes, and stories are heavy, just in general, but especially in New York, with crime and other things. You need those moments where you could laugh, because there's a lot of funny characters in a city of that size as well, and really anywhere. So glad you could mention that. Second, if you could interview one person, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg, just because of how much of a pioneer and role model she is.
Third,
I just want to pick a brain.
Oh, yeah, I don't blame it. Third, best piece of advice anyone has ever given you.
Best piece of advice is don't have a reporter voice, because you just want to talk as authentically as you can. And the message of that being just be authentic, be genuine, because I think people see through when you're putting on your reporter, hat. I think people see that can read that as ingenuine. So just being genuine and being who you are, whether you're working or not.
This is how Ali talks, everybody. She does, this is it. Breaking news here in the Mike Newhaven podcast. This is her actual voice. So fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Ooh, favorite bar or restaurant? Well, a fun bar it's a little bougie, but employees only. That's a fun one. Favorite restaurant? I like Uva, the Italian restaurant. I think that's a good one.
All right. So fifth and finally, what advice would you give anyone looking to enter your profession?
I think I would pass along the advice of, don't be afraid to be vulnerable in situations. Don't be afraid. Don't feel like you have to know everything.
And that concludes episode 118 of the Mike Newhaven podcast. See, it was painless. It was a lot of fun. I promised I'd get you out here quickly, and I had a lot of fun. I had a good time talking to you. Thank you. Appreciate it. So before we go, if you have any plugs or shout outs, I know you were active on social media. Fire away.
Just Ali Bauman TV on Twitter and Ali Bauman on Instagram.
On my end, if you don't know, I should say where to find me by now. If you're listening for the first time, Mike Newhaven on Twitter, of course, original_MC1 on Instagram, and Mike Colón, and then MIC_D for the first word of the podcast on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. I'd be happy to have you. And if you want to contact me, I'll put my business lines and business emails in the description of the show. That way you can reach me if you got something for me. So coming up on the Mike Newhaven podcast, a couple of very, very interesting shows. Friday, is going to be volume 6 of the miniseries, The Men Inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. Inspector Ron Wasson, who ran the entire unit, will join me to discuss his time in the emergency service unit. Of course, once he ascended to inspector, what he did in order to run the entire unit smoothly. And of course, next week will be volume 7 of the best of the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, with retired FDNY firefighter Tim Brown, who will discuss his 19 years with the FDNY and, of course, responding to the World Trade Center on 9/11, discussing the heroics of men who responded with him, some who survived the collapse of the World Trade Center, some who did not. In the meantime, on behalf of Ali Bauman of CBS New York, I'm Mike Colón. Take care, everyone. We will see you next time, and stay safe.